Welcome to the deep dive. If you're here to get a solid handle on important topics quickly and maybe sharpen your English skills along the way, well, you're definitely in the right spot.
That's the idea.
We dig into interesting subjects, look at the key research, and pull out what really matters. It's kind of like a workout for your brain and your English comprehension all at once.
Hmm.
So today, we are diving deep into the neuroscience of motivation. Why we do the things we do. We're drawing heavily from the Huberman Lab Essentials on this.
Yeah, it's a great source for this topic.
Yeah.
We're really going to get into dopamine, its role, and how it shapes, well, pretty much everything from getting out of bed to chasing huge goals.
Right. Motivation. It's fundamental, isn't it? Like you can't do much without it.
Absolutely fundamental. And dopamine is right at the center of that story. It's not just about feeling good, though that's part of it. It's deeply tied to our drive, our desire to actually move towards things we want.
But it's got a downside too, right? You mentioned a double-edged blade.
Exactly. It powers our achievements, our learning, our striving.
Yeah.
But it's also heavily implicated in things like addiction and certain mental health conditions. So understanding it is, well, it's crucial.
Okay, so let's unpack dopamine itself. I gather it wasn't always seen as the motivation molecule. What did scientists first think it was?
That's a really good point.
Yeah.
Yeah, back in the late 1950s when it was first identified, they actually saw it mainly as a building block, a precursor for epinephrine.
Epinephrine. Adrenaline.
Exactly.
No.
Adrenaline, the stuff that gets you ready for a fight or flight, makes your heart race, that kind of thing.
Okay.
And dopamine is a step in making adrenaline. But researchers pretty quickly figured out it had its own really important jobs in the brain separate from that, especially in controlling movement and, like we're talking about, driving motivation.
Which brings us to the brain's reward pathway. Sounds important. Is this like the engine room for motivation?
That's a great way to put it. Yeah, the core players here are two areas. The ventral tegmental area, the VTA, and the nucleus accumbens.
VTA and nucleus accumbens. Got it.
Think of the VTA as like the starting point. It has neurons that produce dopamine, and they send that dopamine over to the nucleus accumbens, that connection, that VTA to accumbens pathway. That's the fundamental circuit. That's what gets us going.
Okay, so that's the accelerator. But surely there's got to be a brake, too. We can't just be wanting things all the time.
Right, exactly. You need balance. And the main brake system involves the prefrontal cortex. That's the bit right behind your forehead.
The thinking part of the brain, planning, decisions.
Precisely. It's involved in all that executive function stuff. It helps regulate the dopamine system, kind of putting context and control over when and how strongly we pursue things. It underlines this idea that motivation isn't just pure drive. It's this constant balancing act, a push and pull between wanting something and maybe the cost or effort involved. Pleasure versus pain, in a way.
So it's a two-part process, this balancing act. Even when we're just chilling out, is this pathway still doing something? Is there like a baseline level?
Yeah, there is. Even when you're relaxed, not actively craving something, there's a sort of background tonic level of dopamine being released, a baseline firing rate.
Okay.
But the magic happens when you anticipate something desirable. You think about that coffee or seeing a friend or getting a good grade, and boom, that firing rate can shoot way up.
Ah, so it's the anticipation, not just getting the thing.
That's the crucial bit. It's the wanting, the craving, the drive towards the thing. That surge of dopamine is what generates that feeling. It focuses your attention, makes you want to move, to act, to get the reward.
So dopamine is really about the wanting more than the liking.
Pretty much. Now, dopamine is released when we get nice things too, like tasty food or during intimacy, but its primary role seems to be generating that forward momentum, that desire. It makes us focus on what we don't have yet. The molecule itself is neutral. It's the change, the increase that creates the drive.
That makes a lot of sense. And I guess the size of that dopamine spike varies a lot depending on what we're wanting.
Oh, massively. The research shows some pretty dramatic differences, like finding some food you really enjoy, maybe a 50% increase over that baseline level.
Okay. Noticeable.
Sex or intimacy maybe doubles it, around 100% increase.
Right.
Nicotine pushes it up further, maybe 150%. But then you get to potent drugs like cocaine or amphetamine, and the numbers just explode. You're talking potentially 1,000% increase very, very rapidly.
Wow. 1,000. Okay. I can see how that would be intense and highly addictive.
Absolutely. That huge, fast spike is a key reason they create such strong, almost closed loops of craving and seeking. It just hijacks the whole system.
And you mentioned earlier that even just thinking about these things can trigger dopamine.
Yes, and that's really significant. Just anticipating food, sex, nicotine, or even those drugs can cause a dopamine release. Maybe not always as huge as the real thing, especially with strong addiction where the anticipation response can sometimes blunt a bit. But it's still powerful enough to drive that wanting, that craving.
Shows how powerful our thoughts are in shaping our brain chemistry.
Totally. Our brains evolved this system to motivate us towards things essential for survival, like food and reproduction. Drugs basically hotwire it.
So what about modern stuff, like scrolling through social media or playing video games? Where do they fit in?
Yeah, good question. It's a bit different. Video games, especially ones with lots of novelty, new levels, unexpected rewards, they can trigger dopamine releases somewhere in that range between nicotine and maybe even approaching cocaine levels in some cases. Novelty is a big driver.
Okay, so games can be quite potent. Social media.
Social media is maybe a bit trickier. You might get an initial hit when you log on and see notifications, but it might taper off. However, the unpredictability, the random like, the new comment, the novel post that taps into a different mechanism we'll talk about later, intermittent reinforcement, which can still make it quite compelling, even addictive, without constant massive spikes.
Interesting. You mentioned addiction and this pleasure-pain balance. It sounds like there's more to it than just chasing the high.
Oh, absolutely. Addiction is way more complex than just the initial pleasure. What happens is, after any peak in pleasure, any dopamine surge, there's a corresponding dip below your baseline.
A dip, like feeling worse afterwards.
Sort of.
Huh?
It might not be conscious agony, but it's a kind of low-level pain, a discomfort, a craving. Think about wanting another piece of chocolate right after you finish the first one, even if you're full, or feeling that pull to check your phone again. That's partly this downward deflection.
So it's like a seesaw. Pleasure goes up, then pain craving goes up to balance it.
Exactly. It's a mirror image. For every bit of pleasure, there's an equal and opposite amount of pain or craving that follows. That's a really key insight from the research.
And does that change over time with repeated exposure?
Yes, and this is where it gets diabolical, especially with addiction. With repeated exposure to the same stimulus, the pleasure peak tends to get smaller. It doesn't feel as good anymore.
Right, tolerance.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And this is crucial. The pain dip, the craving part, actually gets deeper and lasts longer.
Oh, wow. So less pleasure, more craving.
Precisely. So eventually, especially with drug addiction, a lot of the behavior isn't even about seeking pleasure anymore. It's about trying to escape the intense pain of the craving, trying to just feel normal again.
That really paints a clearer picture of that cycle. Okay, so dopamine is all about this wanting, this external focus. You mentioned other chemicals involved in feeling good, these here and now molecules.
Yeah, that's a good contrast. While dopamine drives us towards things we don't have, things outside ourselves, what we call exteroception, focusing outward.
Eyes on the prize.
Right. Other neuromodulators are more about appreciating what we do have, our internal state. The main one here is serotonin.
Serotonin, often linked to mood, right?
Yes, it's often called the molecule of well-being or bliss or contentment with the present moment. It's released by a different area, the RAF nucleus. It promotes interoception, focusing on your internal feelings, feeling satisfied, calm, content with the here and now, that warm, cozy feeling.
So dopamine is go get it, and serotonin is, this is nice right here.
That's a pretty good summary. And there are others too, like endocannabinoids, the brain's own cannabis-like molecules. They also contribute to that feeling of bliss and being content in the moment.
So ideally, we need a balance between the striving and the satisfaction.
Absolutely. Too much relentless dopamine-driven pursuit without the ability to appreciate things can lead to burnout or never feeling satisfied. Too much here and now without motivation might lead to, well, not getting much done. A healthy emotional life needs both systems working in harmony.
Okay, so listening to this, someone might think, right, I need more dopamine, I procrastinate, I lack motivation. Are there, like, healthy ways to boost it?
It's a common thought. First, it's worth remembering procrastination isn't always low dopamine. Some people thrive on deadline pressure. That's a different mechanism. But for genuine low motivation, yes, there are things people explore, but always talk to a doctor first.
Right, important disclaimer.
Definitely. Lifestyle factors matter hugely. Sleep, exercise, nutrition. Beyond that, some people look into supplements like mucuna pruriens, which contains L-DOPA, a dopamine precursor. Or there are medications like Wellbutrin, which affects dopamine and norepinephrine.
But you mentioned too much can be a problem.
Yes, absolutely. High dopamine isn't necessarily bliss. It can lead to that state of enough is never enough, constantly chasing the next thing, potentially impulsivity, or even aspects of mania in some conditions.
Mm.
It's about balance, not just cranking it up.
So maybe it's less about more dopamine and more about managing the system we have. How do we do that?
That's a much better way to think about it. One really interesting strategy is about how we think about our achievements. Instead of just hitting a goal and immediately jumping to the next thing.
Which high achievers often do.
Exactly. Instead, consciously take a moment to savor the win. Reflect on the effort, the process, the good feelings associated with it. This cognitive savoring seems to extend the positive phase of the dopamine release and can actually blunt that painful downward dip afterwards.
Ah, so appreciate the reward mentally, don't just grab it and run?
Kind of, yeah. It's about balancing that forward drive with those here and now practices. Mindfulness, gratitude, good sleep are all relevant here. It helps regulate the whole system, adjusting our dopamine schedule so we anticipate things positively without setting ourselves up for huge disappointment.
You mentioned a rat experiment earlier that really nailed the difference between pleasure and motivation. Can you walk us through that? It sounds key.
Yeah, it's a classic, very elegant. Basically, they had rats that loved a certain food treat, and they'd happily press a lever to get it, showing motivation and liking it.
Okay, normal rat behavior.
Then they took another group of rats
Hmm.
and selectively damaged the dopamine neurons in their reward pathway.
So no dopamine related to reward.
Right. Now, here's the fascinating part. If you put the tasty food right in front of these dopamine-depleted rats, they'd still eat it. They still seem to like it, to get pleasure from it.
So they could still enjoy it.
Yes. But, and this is the kicker, if you move the lever just a tiny distance away, just requiring a little bit of effort,
Mm.
they wouldn't move. They wouldn't press the lever. They lacked the motivation to work for the reward, even though they'd enjoy it if they got it.
Wow, okay, that really separates it. Dopamine isn't the pleasure itself, it's the drive to get the pleasure.
Exactly. It's the motivation for pleasure, not the capacity for pleasure. A really profound distinction.
So thinking about people who feel generally unmotivated, the kind of feeling, what could be going on there?
Well, first off, persistent low motivation, apathy.
Mm.
That can definitely be a symptom of clinical depression, and that needs proper professional help. That's really important.
Absolutely.
Beyond that, there are other factors. Some research looks at things like phenylethylamine, PEA, citrasamine, that can cause a mild release of both dopamine and serotonin. Some people report feeling a bit more focused or brighter when using it as a supplement.
Interesting. But again, check with a doctor.
Always.
Mhm.
Self-treating based on symptoms is risky. You need a proper assessment.
Right. Another point you made was about subjectivity. How our belief about something can change the dopamine response.
Yes, our expectations are incredibly powerful. There was this neat study with caffeine. They gave students either caffeine or a placebo,
Okay.
but they told some students in each group that they were getting either plain caffeine or Adderall, which is obviously a much stronger stimulant.
Ah, setting up an expectation.
Exactly. And guess what? The students who believe they got Adderall, even if they only got caffeine, or even the placebo, reported feeling more stimulated, more motivated, even a bit more anxious. And they actually performed better on cognitive tests.
Seriously. Just believing it was stronger made a difference.
Yep. It shows how much our subjective interpretation, our beliefs and expectations, can shape our brain chemistry and our subsequent behavior. The placebo effect is real, and it works partly through these dopamine pathways.
That's fascinating. Okay, so this leads into managing our dopamine schedule. How can we use this knowledge, maybe avoid those big crashes after a reward, and stay motivated long term, especially for things like, say, learning English, which takes time?
Right. Long-term goals are a perfect example. And the surprising insight here comes from gambling.
Gambling, how does that help?
Well, think about why slot machines are so addictive.
Mm.
It's not because you win every time.
Right.
You win unpredictably. Sometimes you get a small win, sometimes nothing, sometimes maybe a bigger one. It's variable.
It keeps you hooked, hoping for the next one.
Exactly. That's called intermittent reinforcement, unpredictable rewards. And it turns out this is one of the most powerful ways to keep dopamine flowing and motivation high. Much more powerful than rewarding every single time.
Okay, so predictable rewards lead to dopamine potentially dropping off, but unpredictable ones keep it going.
Precisely. Predictable rewards lead to dopamine spiking before the reward, then dropping afterwards.
Yeah.
Unpredictable rewards keep dopamine elevated more consistently because you're always hoping this time might be the one.
So, we can use this for good, for our own goals, like the English learning example.
Absolutely. This is a really practical takeaway. If you're working on a long-term project like getting fluent in English or saving money or getting fit, Don't reward yourself every single time you make a bit of progress.
Really, don't celebrate the small wins.
Well, acknowledge them, definitely. Feel good about them. But maybe don't give yourself a tangible treat every time. Mix it up. Sometimes reward yourself after hitting a small milestone, sometimes push through a couple more before you do. Keep the reward schedule unpredictable.
So maybe study hard for 3 days, then give yourself a break or a treat. Next time, maybe go for 5 days, then maybe just two.
Exactly like that.
Yeah.
It prevents your dopamine system from getting complacent or crashing hard after every reward.
Hmm.
It keeps that underlying drive, that striving, much more robust over the long haul. Self-reward is good, but make it intermittent.
That's a really powerful, counterintuitive idea. Okay, this has been incredibly insightful. Let's try and pull the main threads together for everyone listening.
Sounds good.
So we've established dopamine is crucial for motivation, the wanting, the drive. It's not just about pleasure.
Right. And it operates in this delicate pleasure-pain balance.
Hmm.
Every high has a corresponding low, a craving that gets worse with repeated exposure.
And we need those here and now molecules like serotonin for balance, appreciating what we have, not just chasing what we don't.
Absolutely. Contentment is just as important as drive.
And finally, we can actually manage our motivation by understanding our dopamine schedule, using things like cognitive savoring and critically intermittent reinforcement, unpredictable rewards to keep our long-term drives strong.
Exactly. Understanding these brain mechanisms isn't just abstract science. It gives you real tools you can potentially use to manage your own motivation, your emotions, your goals, including your English learning journey.
Yeah, paying attention to your own patterns of wanting and craving in daily life suddenly seems really relevant.
It can be very illuminating.
So a final thought for you, the listener. Start noticing. When do you feel that urge, that wanting? What triggers it? How do you feel after you get what you wanted? And how could you maybe play with that reward schedule, especially for your longer term goals like mastering English? Could making yourself rewards a bit less predictable actually help you stay motivated? Something to reflect on.
Definitely food for thought.
Thank you so much for joining us for this deep dive. We really hope it's given you some useful insights into the science behind why you do what you do and maybe some practical ideas for your own journey.